AMW විකුණු පාන විතරක්ම වෙන්නේ නැති ගන්න.
ඕන වාහනයක් ගන්නවා.
පරණ වාහනයක්
ගන්නවා.
පාර්ට්ස් හැම හොයා ගන්න අමාරු කාර් එකක්
ගන්නවා.
සල්ලි ගන්න විකුණනකන් ඉන්න වෙන්නේ.
පැය 3න් සල්ලි දෙනවා.
ලීසින් කරලා තිබුණොත්
ලීස් එක සෙටල් කරලා අපි ගන්නවා.
කොකටත් එක ෂුවර් කරගන්න හැබැයි.
අපෙන් නොගත්තත් අපි ගන්නවා.
When you're the leader of your business, keeping your business ahead of the game is always your aim. And here in Bisnomics, in your weekend's most profitable 60 minutes, that's exactly what we help you to achieve. I'm Tailor, and our focus today will be on empathetic leadership. Empathy, the ability to understand another person. One might say that is the most important skill for a leader today. When there is so much of crisis going around as a business leader, how much do you understand your team members? Do you make decisions? Do you communicate in a way where your team members feel that you understand them? If not, today's episode will help you to get some insights on that and even improve your leadership game. Our special guest for today's episode is none other than a specialist in empathetic leadership. She is an author, a world-acclaimed speaker, and someone with experience across multiple continents in the field of advertising and communication. Please join me in welcoming the guest of today's episode, Ms. Mimi Nicklin. Mimi, welcome to Bisnomics. Absolute pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Mimi, I'd like to get to the crux of the matter here. What exactly is leadership? Because we ask this question from so many people, but the interesting thing about this is that no matter how many people you ask this from, you will always have a different answer, you will always have a different perspective. I'm curious to know your perspective. As a citizen of the world who has traveled around the world, you have worked across the world, you have obviously been exposed to so many different cultures. So from a global perspective, what exactly is leadership to you? And today in this world, what are we expecting from a leader?
Fascinating question to start. I mean, I think from a what is a leader point of view, for me and in all the experience I've had around the world, a leader is someone that is able to evoke trust and respect from a group of others that will therefore want to and be motivated to follow them, to follow in their footsteps and to believe in them. A leader's responsibility is to be able to take people from point A to point B, whether that's short term or long term, and actually enable them to come on that journey with you. In terms of what's expected today, it's changed hugely, and the need for emotional intelligence, empathy, the need to understand those that you are leading has really changed and has shifted in a very sort of upward trajectory, unlike at any other point in history. And of course, in the years that have passed, what employees need from their leaders has changed, their expectations have changed, and therefore what you need today to be a good leader is different from perhaps what it was only 5 years ago.
Interesting thoughts indeed. So today, especially as the world is emerging out of the pandemic and economies are trying to grow, people are returning back to the workplace. They are seeing that face-to-face interaction and communication with their bosses, with their leaders. So how, in your view, has the expectations changed? The expectations that people have from their leaders, in your perspective?
People are now looking for a far more authentic level of leadership. I think one of the things that the pandemic taught us, particularly when it comes to the use of screens and digital engagement and communication, is there's been a breakdown of many of those hierarchies. And what that's meant is that employees, teams today, far more demanding of their leaders, of the teams that they look up to be authentic, to be true, to be real reflections of who they are, but equally to understand who I am as a member of staff, as a team member. Just because hopefully the worst of the pandemic is over, life has changed, expectations have changed. And one of the things I think we've seen coming through more than ever is the intelligence and the insight around generational gaps, right? The leaders on the whole, perhaps people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and the workforce that's coming up behind them, they have extremely different expectations of what a workplace should be and what a leader should be. And that's challenging. That's challenging for many leaders that are out there in the market to look at how do I adapt my leadership, perhaps something that I've been doing for 20 or 30 years, to what is a very changing need from the new employees coming in at the bottom.
Interesting thoughts once again. Let's get to empathetic leadership, your speciality, something that you're extremely passionate about. What exactly would you mean by empathetic leadership? And Mimi, how relevant is it in today's world? Because we hear this common term and common phrase all the time.
Yeah.
They just don't understand me. We hear this echoing across the world. So in a time like that, how vital is empathetic leadership?
Well, let's start with what empathy is. To empathize with someone is to be able to take their perspective. So one of the things I spend a lot of time explaining to leaders and to organizations is that empathy is not a soft skill. This is not an emotional skill. This is actually a hard skill, okay? It's a hard skill to master. It's a hard skill to find in staff, and it's a hard skill to sustain. To
Is it also fair
empathize-
to call it a life skill, a very
It's-
vital life skill?
It is a life skill, absolutely. I mean, fundamentally, empathy is the backbone to all of human evolution. Because if you cannot empathize, you cannot build, you cannot create teamwork, you can't create a town if you don't all understand each other, let alone a global corporation. So to be able to empathize is something that we're all born with. It's built into your prefrontal cortex. It is a skill set. And of course, today, the need for that in the workplace, what you just asked me then around organizational empathy, is the ability to bring that perspective taking, that ability to understand those around you, whether that's your team, your suppliers, your stakeholders, your clients, to understand what they're bringing to the table. What are their challenges? Why are they negotiating with you? Why are they holding back? Why are they frustrated? All of these questions come under empathy, the ability to understand the perspective of those around you. Why is it important? Because the world has changed, as we've established just now, and people need that in the workplace. Beyond that, you will have heard the phrase, the Great Resignation, where we're seeing staff and team members all across the world walk out of businesses with less concern than
millions,
ever.
in millions of numbers.
Yes, in millions. And it used to be, I mean, if we think of our parents, to leave a job was a very big, long-term decision. The millennials and the Zs, they're just walking out. If they do not feel understood, if they do not feel that their organization understands and represents them equally, fairly, and authentically, they're very willing to change industry or change role in a relatively short sort of decision time.
And do you notice as well that most of the millennials today, when they come to a workplace, they expect the freedom to be given to explore new ideas, new suggestions, and they want to be heard. They don't want to be just told, they want to be heard, and if they feel they are not being heard, they will walk out.
Absolutely. And I think the learning is two sides of that. So on the one hand, if you don't listen to them, yes, they might walk out. But on the other hand, if you're not listening to them, then why not? Because they are actually the future, right? If we're talking about the youth and the young ones or the middle level that are coming through businesses today, they are far more likely to have the sense of pulse of what's going on the streets, on the ground, in real life. And so many of today's best sort of evolutions and innovations are coming from very, very young people. So they deserve to be listened to, and it's of value to listen to them. But to your point, they're also demanding that as well.
Absolutely. And if you look at the current situation in Sri Lanka, because Mimi, I've seen your social media work, you're someone who is extremely popular globally for your, I would say, unique way of thinking in terms of being positive, being empathetic. But if you take the current Sri Lankan context, and I know that this is a situation that almost all Sri Lankan corporate leaders, business leaders, and individuals are going through, we are struck by the triple crisis, the energy crisis, the electricity crisis, the forex crisis, and this kind of goes into a spillover effect for so many other businesses around the country. When all these problems are there, how can a leader still stay positive?
Look, I think it's a very difficult scenario to be a leader. It was very similar in 2020 and probably for many into 2021 as well, because the pandemic, like the current situation in Sri Lanka, is something we haven't been through as leaders before. There is no rule book. Nobody gave me a book as how to be a CEO today, right? So I think it's a very tough time. It is a very difficult time to come through that. I think you need to perhaps shift the focus slightly on that question away from positivity per se, because actually teams aren't necessarily looking for ever positivity, right? Everybody understands that we're in tough times and that positivity may not be the right emotion for the boardroom today. But this idea of being able to find opportunity, and I'm a great believer that where there is challenge, there is opportunity, right? So the harder things get, the more that means we can innovate, the more that means we can find opportunity. It means that as leaders we have to listen ever more. And listening is probably one of the widest needed skill sets in the world. We don't teach our children, we don't teach in school, we don't teach in university. But as context becomes more complex and your employees are coming into work and you know that they've left this environment, they've left homes that aren't powered, they've left children in schools with troubles, maybe they have elderly at home who don't have any fans or air conditioning. There's a lot of tension. And I think as leaders we have to really respect, and this has changed, that there is context, right? How someone is performing or behaving today cannot be separated from the context they walked in from and will go home to tonight. And that understanding is different. 20 years ago, a boss didn't care, right? You come to work, you do your job, you go home. But I think that need for empathy, when the world gets crazy, that need goes up.
Mimi, in terms of what the Sri Lankan corporate sector is going through today, especially the employees, as you very correctly said, they've got troubles at home, they come to office, even the officers are lacking power, clients are screaming from one end. It's the perfect storm that one could really think of. For a leader, if you were leading a team in Sri Lanka, I would like to ask you this: how would you be starting your day, starting the work day at the workplace? What would your approach be?
I think it's very important to address what's going on without going into gossip and scandal. There's plenty of gossip and scandal, not just in Sri Lanka, but everywhere. But to actually ask people how they're feeling. So it's really, really powerful words are how are you? You know, how are you and how can I help? I've learned in my career and in running businesses that the latter, how can I help, are some of the most powerful words in leadership. Ask your employees how they are, give them the space to tell you. This is not about moaning or being an agony aunt, but simply recognizing what we've been through the night before and the day that's beginning and asking them, how can I help you today? That question, it closes the gap between leaders and their teams. It creates respect, it creates trust, which goes back to my point at the beginning about what a leader is. So I think you have to be human. We can't, as I said, we can't divorce ourselves from what's going on out in the world. We have to recognize that everybody deals with that differently and that people's contexts are very different. People may need you to flex rules for them, change rules for them, and not to be scared of that. Just because it's been one way for 25 years doesn't mean it can't change.
I like that thought. Just because something hasn't changed doesn't mean that it can't change.
Exactly.
The potential to change is always there.
Exactly.
Mimi, I want to also shift the focus towards managing millennials, because now you and I, we are not millennials. We basically are not being directly dealing with the Gen Zs and all that, but we are now having to manage them. We have to deal with them. We have to make sure that they are able to contribute their best to the organization. But for someone who is not from the modern millennial era or the Gen Z era, when it comes to managing them, what should they know about them?
I think what they should know is that this new generation of people, they're incredibly curious, they're incredibly community driven, they feel great responsibility for the world. They believe, quite fairly, that the older generations have messed up their world to some extent, right? Whether that's true or not, but that's what they believe. They look up to us and they think it's our fault. And in part, probably it is.
Probably it
right?
is.
Probably it is.
Probably it is.
But they are very generous. They are very community driven. They are curious. They want to grow. They're impatient, for sure. But of those facets, I think that the most important thing is to understand that the need for community for this generation is more than at any other time. Where they find that community on the whole is through social media. And I think if I had to give one piece of advice to leaders that are at the other end of the spectrum to understand, is when that they're on Instagram or Twitter or wherever they are, they're not sort of escaping work or wasting time. They are connecting with their community, right? So when we were younger and we went out for a coffee break outside, in our break time we connected. Today's generation, they might go out and all stand separately and all be on their phone.
Correct.
There is a perception with the older leader that they are lazy or disconnected or they're
Distracted, unfocused.
Distracted. But that is where their community is, and that is where their insight is coming from. And as I said earlier, all of that insight can be hugely valuable to your business. So I think it's a matter of understanding the psychology, taking a bigger picture and saying, what is this young person doing and why? Now, are there other sides of this generation that are very complex to manage? Yes. There is a lot of entitlement because of that feeling that the older generation hasn't necessarily supported their world. And there is a belief, and I wrote about this in my book, that we can't teach them anything, right? There is often a misconception that you can't teach me because you don't know my world. You don't understand us. You're too disconnected. How you used to do things is different. The key is to acknowledge that and tell them, listen, I don't understand what you're doing right now, but let's focus on the outcomes. We're both in this for the same reason. The path to get there may be different.
Correct.
But as long as we're aligned to the vision, the business vision, the project vision, we know where we're going as a team. I need to give you the space to achieve those goals how you want to achieve those goals. How I would have done it 10 or 20 years ago is actually a different matter. Focus on today's age and trust them. Trust people to do their jobs. Sometimes that's very scary, but let go, give them space, course correct, and trust them to do the right thing.
Some very empathetic insights there from you, Mimi, and we're going to come back to you on more details on that. Stay tuned. We will be back after this short break. This is Bisnomics.
අංකල් සැම්සන් එයාගේ කාරක විකුණන්න තීරණය කළා. ඇඩ් එක දැම්ම විතරයි. සට ගාලා කට්ටිය එන්න ගත්තා. හැබැයි
මගේ අම්මෝ තව ලක්ෂ දෙකක් අඩුවෙන් කරමුද?
ඕපන් පේපර්ස් කරමු.
මට ඔය හිරේ විලංගු වෙන වැඩ කරන්න නම් බෑ.
මේක හොඳ ගානකට විකුණලා දෙන්න. හැබැයි මීටරේ නම් පොඩ්ඩක් කරකවන්න වෙයි.
ඇයි ඉතින් බොරු කරලා විකුණන්නේ? ජෙනුයින් මයිලේජ් එකයි සර්විස් රෙකෝඩ් ඔක්කොමයි තියෙනවනේ.
අංකල් සැම්සන්ට වාහන විකුණන එක එපා වුණා. AMW වෙතින් ඕනෑම වාහනයක් කරදරයක් නැතුව විකුණ ගන්න. අපෙන් නොගත්තත් අපි ගන්නවා.
Welcome back to Bisnomics, your weekend's most profitable 60 minutes. I'm Tarandu Amarsekara. We are in conversation with a specialist in empathetic leadership, a creative strategist who is none other than Ms. Mimi Nicklin. Mimi, now let's talk about one aspect when it comes to communication, because nowadays even businesses need to communicate in an empathetic manner with the customers, with the community, because even that is under scrutiny, because if you communicate something that is not aligned with the people's pulse, people's expectation, the business can really be in some hot waters there. So in communication, we live in a world where they are always saying, look, think outside the box, get the information from outside, and always look outside. But you've been someone who has been advocating the concept of thinking inside the box. Tell us, how does thinking inside the box, looking inside the box, how does that help today's leaders?
I think it's a two-part answer, actually. The inside-the-box concept is very much connected to marketing, and as you said, I do a lot of marketing and brand strategy. Inside the box talks about looking inside our organizations to find the stories and the brand journalism that we want to connect with those consumers, as you said, to empathize with them, to connect with them. So much of that sits within our businesses, particularly if you are a heritage or a family business. You have a very long system behind you of stories and opportunities and growth. It is very easy for leaders to jump to external partners to create a new story and to have this ever-hungry desire for new and new and new and more new. But inside the box is a real sort of concept saying, look at what you have. Who is telling your stories? Who could be telling your stories that are going to connect to that audience? And very often you'll find the answer is marketing. The marketing director and his or her team. But actually, what about procurement? What about finance? What about the people in the factory? Because some of those people may have assets and facets that they could be sharing that create that connection. So the inside the box approach is very much about brand journalism. And in an age when we're trying to create social media content every minute, it really aids the leaders of today to create that content. I think that communication is around being consistent, being frequent, and being ever present, which can be incredibly intimidating and expensive if you're constantly looking outside to build that ecosystem.
Interesting. And you mentioned a very important word there, brand journalism. What exactly would that be?
Brand journalism is the ability to create stories, editorial or otherwise, from your brand, right? And unless you're a very new brand, every brand has stories to tell. And that's why this need to look across the organization is very, very important. If you look at businesses like General Electric in the US, they have a real focus on brand journalism. They even have a chief storyteller who is an ex-journalist, is a very senior gentleman who used to be in marketing and now plays a full-time role in storytelling for GE across all of their pillars of their business. So brand journalism is a way to tell your stories consistently and an always-on manner, similar to the media may have done sort of in times gone by. And it does both improve your return on investment, so really improve the value of that work, whilst keeping the cost down. Because as I said, if you try and create content every day outside, your budget will never allow. So this is a way of making cost far more cost sensitive with a better return.
And is this where looking inside the box plays a crucial role? Because when you look inside the box, inside your company, you are connecting better with the soul of the organization.
Absolutely.
And our soul is where our best stories come from. Am I right?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, it's very clear from a neuroscience point of view that the information, the marketing that connects with people is the emotional marketing, what's called the System 1 mind, which is the intuitive emotional response. What we know in marketing today is that that response is far more powerful and far more instant than the more functional, rational response. So the desire to have something is far quicker and reacts more quickly than the recognition about can I afford it, should I buy it, all of those rational pieces. So absolutely, the ability to tell stories from the soul of your business is going to connect with that System 1 thinking. And as I said, we know from neuroscience, that's what drives up, in fact, all business metrics: loyalty, motivation, repeat purchase, engagement, awareness, and return on investment. So absolutely, the more you can connect with the emotional storytelling of your business, the improvements that you're going to see are going to be across the board.
Fantastic. Mimi, I want to congratulate you actually at this point of time regarding the publishing of your book, Softening the Edge.
Yes.
And I believe that this is something truly revolutionary. It's a new way of looking at empathetic leadership as well. So congratulations to you on that.
Thank you.
And tell me, what are the key findings from your book? Because this seems to have been quite a lot of effort, passion. I would say you have put your heart and soul to it.
Absolutely.
So, being empathetic, I understand how much the effort would have been there. So, once again, congratulations on the success of the book. But do share with us some of the key findings from this book.
The book was written as a reflection of a personal story, to be honest. So it is a leadership book, but I believe it's incredibly accessible because it's written part as a very sort of first-hand experience in terms of turning around a business that wasn't doing well to a really thriving business. So what the book does is unpacks all the parts of that journey that I learned along the way in approaching what was an extremely challenging time for the business. In terms of key takeaways, I would say that trust, which we've touched on earlier, was a really important part. Trust people to be able to do their jobs. And as I said earlier, it can be very hard. When people feel trusted, you close the gap. You shorten the distance between you and them. And of course, listening is a very big part of that. I guess another big takeaway is the importance of environment. And creating an environment where people can really thrive, listening to what they need in terms of lighting, context, business environment. And again, these things don't have to cost a lot of money. We're not talking about building brand new offices, but just reflecting the staff that you have today in their environment and hearing them, being open to that communication, measuring the impact of that communication. I always say that what you measure manifests. So this is quite a conscientious decision, but it's also a conscious decision. In order to lead a more empathetic, open, and sustainably well organization, I write a lot about regenerative leadership. So leadership that does regenerate, organizations that regenerate, in a context that regenerates. If you think about our planet today, there is nothing that grows forever. Nothing. Fish, trees, plants, animals, nothing grows forever. So why should our businesses? Why should our businesses at the end of every financial year be expected to have double-digit growth? We need to find ways to regenerate our organizations so that they can grow, but so that we can balance or put our people alongside that profit to create a far more sustainable cycle of business in the future.
Growing people grows the business.
Exactly, it does.
Mimi, now in your viewpoint and in terms of your perspective, I want to ask, we say that a leader is somebody who can build another leader who will go on to build another leader. Because if I'm as the leader only growing my business and not my people, at one point of time when I'm no more, the business is going to really collapse. And as you very correctly said, we need to regenerate, we need to build those people. Now, you're also a leader. You lead an organization. You have a very successful advertising agency which is operating with global clients. how do you build leaders? What is Mimi's way? Everyone's got a way. What's Mimi's way?
Well, I think lots of the things I've been talking about today, if you ask my team, they would say all of these things. I take a huge amount of my time out to listen to people. I do ask, how can I help? Very, very often. I do not micromanage, but I make sure that my team always knows I'm there. I know I'm there to support, I'm there to back them up. I believe them, I side with them, and I fight for them with my clients, right? If my clients are doing something that we consider as an organization that is detrimental or just less than perfect, really, for the team, I defend and I protect my own first. What that means is, I hope for all of you listening, is that they do the same back to me. And as a team, as I said earlier, we have a mutual goal. We want to build a business, all of us together, where we can all thrive, where we all have the freedom to choose and the freedom to grow. And what I offer them is that space, and what they offer me back is the consistency and the loyalty to go on that journey together. I'm very honest. If I don't know the answer, I tell them. I tell them I don't know the answer. You know, if I'm not sure what's going to happen, I'm open about that. And of course, I try to find a solution for all of those things. But I think that honesty goes a very, very long way. And corporate honesty is another trending theme, and is something that all leaders need to look at how they can embrace, because it's not long now until it will be a benchmark to have leaders that are honest with their teams.
What's your mantra for building a successful business model as an entrepreneur? Because we have a lot of business leaders who are still trying to figure out, how do I get my business model right? And you're bringing in here a very interesting perspective about not just the numbers, but also the human element. Mimi, what's your mantra for building a business model that takes into account both the numbers as well as the human pulse?
So I think it taps back into my point earlier around regenerative leadership. But my real mantra is that all businesses should be balancing humanism with capitalism. That is what I spent my entire life talking about. I built my business on these principles. How do you build or evolve organizations to balance the humans with the growth? If you do not do that, it's only a matter of time until one of those sides falls off, right? Because our people need more, because our world needs more. We're not in a very stable position as a world right now. It's not just Sri Lanka. You know, when I speak to my clients all over the world, in their own ecosystems, in their own countries, they'll say, well, Mimi, the politics and the it's not just here, right? The whole world is going through a seismic period of change and uncertainty and anxiety. That means that the needs of our people, whether you like it or not as a leader, are paramount and increasing all the time. So my mantra is that we have to build businesses that balance humanism with capitalism, but knowing that, the data shows that when you do that, you will grow. So it works for both sides.
I like the optimism there, indeed. Mimi, when you look at organizations around the world, and when they are carrying out their advertising, their marketing, etc., and of course their brand journalism, as you very correctly said, they have to take into account some of the politics, they have to take into account the environmental factors, the social factors, etc. Now, I am very interested in the social factors, because that's to do with the people.
Yes.
People's shift of thinking, people's shift of trends, the way they live their life, etc. Worldwide, especially post-pandemic, what are the key social changes you are seeing across the world?
I think, unfortunately, they're not particularly positive. The two that come to mind instantly, I would say one is anxiety. There is a huge amount of social anxiety on all levels, and I think the definition of anxiety has probably changed and widened. But people are so unsure. People are unsure in their governments, people are unsure in their businesses, people are unsure of brands. Recent data has showed that 75% of brands could disappear off the planet and nobody would care, right? So there is a huge amount of anxiety in our what once were stable systems. The other side of that, I would say, is skepticism, because we are entering an era of huge skepticism. People do not believe us anymore. Leaders, brands, governments, social services, there's huge amounts of skepticism, in many cases for good reason, but in many cases because it's spilling over from the first trend, which is around uncertainty and anxiety. As I said, on the good news, there is a generation coming through that is very keen to help. There is a focus on rebuilding communities. There is a real demand for generosity, which we're seeing across the board. And if you look at the current Russia and Ukraine environment and the mass generosity and support from the world to support the Ukraine.
People were booking Airbnbs to
They
help the
were.
people
Yes.
in Ukraine who were getting displaced from their homes.
So there is a sense of generosity and community out there that is coming up in the world and is balancing off those more sort of unsure trends. So it's a very changing time. Consumer confidence is low, anxiety is high, but optimism is there on the horizon.
But at the same time, we also do see a rise of activism, and especially against brands, because we sometimes see, Mimi, some of the large brands of the world, if they have been doing something wrong or bad, it's somebody from inside their own organization that will leak out and say, look, my company is doing something wrong, the world take action. Now, how interesting and challenging does that create, does that make things for the big brands?
Yes, particularly again in the younger generations, there is a huge demand to act and they're not scared.
Correct.
That's why we're seeing this great resignation taking place. People have found a confidence to speak up against things that they don't like. They expect brands to behave. I think it's 69% of consumers say that brands should address social problems or social unrest, right?
Correct.
If they're not doing that.
And even right now, the
willing
brands
to-
which are not pulling out of Russia are being severely criticized.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, as the world continues to go through these shifts, more and more consumers will ask brands to act in their favor. And of course, it's not always easy for the brands either. But you're right. That's why all of these things are so needed. Honesty, trust, communication, listening. If you do not listen to the pulse of your business, you will be surprised when these whistleblowers or these bold voices come out because you weren't listening. So what does the Great Resignation mean? It means you need to listen, right? You need to listen, you need to act if you don't want to become an organization where your staff goes AWOL.
What are the trends for the leaders in terms of managing the future ahead of them? Let's talk about that on the other side of this short break. This is Bisnomics.
අංකල් සැම්සන් එයාගේ කාරක විකුණන්න තීරණය කළා. ඇඩ් එක දැම්ම විතරයි. සට ගාලා කට්ටිය එන්න ගත්තා. හැබැයි සතුටින් හිටපු අංකල් සැම්සන්ට වාහන විකුණන එක එපා වුණා. AMW වෙතින් කරදරයක් නැතුව විකුණ ගන්න. අපෙන් නොගත්තත් අපි ගන්නවා.
Welcome back to Bisnomics. I'm Tharandu Amarasekara, and our focus today is on empathetic leadership and lessons for modern leaders in managing the modern generations. And we are in conversation with a specialist in empathetic leadership, Ms. Mimi Nicklin. Mimi, let's talk about your journey. I'm curious to know that, and I'm sure the audience also would love to hear your journey so far. So, how did your career and your leadership journey in advertising, in marketing begin? And today you're a globally acclaimed speaker and author as well. And I'm curious to know that. And also, I also have another very, I would say, curious question, and that is, what do you find in Sri Lanka that makes it attractive for you to live here and operate from here? Because a lot of people, we see the trend, they're leaving Sri Lanka, they don't want to be in Sri Lanka, but here you are a daughter of another nation, but you are adopting Sri Lanka as your nation now. Tell us how that interesting incident happened.
I will. Yes. I mean, I'll start with the story a little bit. So as you said, I've been in advertising agencies and marketing for my entire career. It's taken me, as you mentioned, to many countries. When I arrived in the Middle East in 2018, I came across a business that needed significant turnaround strategy and made a very overt and sort of conscientious choice to do that people first, to really believe that if you put people, not just your team, but your suppliers, your clients, your partners first, you can instigate business change and transformation. I almost used it as my own case study as I was creating that change. And when I went through that process, I remember very clearly sitting with a business coach one lunchtime, talking about intuition in leadership and intuitive leadership. And she stopped me and she said, is it intuition or is it empathy? And I said, no, it's not empathy. What's empathy, right? But what that did was it sent me onto a journey of really looking at what empathy is in the organization, and the neuroscience around that, the data around how human beings use empathy for mutual gain, for pro-social benefit, but also for growth. And I realized very quickly that a lot of my leadership style for the years gone by was in fact empathetic leadership. It's just I hadn't been calling
You
it
haven't
that.
coined it
I
that
hadn't
way.
coined it. That led me to start writing. I was never planning to write a book. I just wanted to write perhaps a white paper or a series of articles. And eventually that led to me to getting my publishing deal and writing the book and starting a podcast all around empathetic leadership and organizational change through human understanding. And by the end of 2020, 85,000 people had come to that podcast, which was entirely unexpected, and led me to want to do this more full time. Now, at the time, I was living in Dubai, which is a fabulous city, but it is also a very expensive city. And I wanted to be back in Asia Pacific, but I also wanted somewhere where I could balance cost of living with entrepreneurial desires. I am the CEO of an ad agency, but I did want to make sure that I had time for my consulting work, for the keynote speaking I do, for writing the second book, which leads me to Sri Lanka. It's close to Dubai, so it's actually perfectly located for both business in Dubai and Singapore. We may be going through a tough time right now, but as I said earlier, I have a great belief in Sri Lankans, in the economy here. People tell me all the time there's a lack of talent. I don't think there is. I think there's a lack of leadership.
Clearly.
Perhaps, I don't want to comment on that, perhaps, but there's a lot of talent here. And I feel that, particularly as a creative individual, the best creative work in the world, whether it's branding, communication, marketing, the best communication that really is built on creativity comes from tension. So any country that has a lot of tension points, and we can probably agree there's a few out there today, should be...
Few might be an understatement, Mimi.
Again,
Yes.
perhaps. We should be leading in creativity. Okay, because we have so many barriers and obstacles to overcome. That should be opening us up to innovation, to technological solutions, to creative thinking. So I'm a great believer in Sri Lanka. I am incredibly happy to be here. I have clients here now. We're doing phenomenal work. There is definitely not a lack of talent in Sri Lanka, but there is a huge opportunity to grow and to bounce back from what has been a very tricky few years.
In terms of the life skills needed for a leader, we didn't discuss about empathy. Moving forward, what are the key skills needed for a leader, especially based in Sri Lanka? As we are going through this crisis time, Mimi, what, in your view, what would be the key life skills?
Beyond empathy, I think curiosity is an incredibly important skill set. Be curious about your team, about your clients, about the challenge that's on the piece of paper in front of you. Is it really what your client is telling you it is, or is there something else going on? So curiosity, I think, is very important. I think transparency and/or authenticity are equally incredibly important, as we've spoken about today. The new generation needs that. But as things out there in the world continue to be very scary and very sort of up in the air, people need leaders who are consistent and who are authentic. They need to know that when they come to work for you or they work with you, they're going to get the same experience that they did last time. That creation of security is at the very bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Okay.
It's what
Physiological needs.
Physiological needs. It's what allows us as human beings to thrive. When the brain is in a period of anxiety or stress or strain, people don't work properly. And there's plenty of data around this. When empathy is high, connection's high, psychological safety is high, people do better. They perform better, output per capita goes up, absenteeism goes down, tenure goes up, profit goes up. So consistency, authenticity, thank you, authenticity and curiosity. Yeah. I think if you can balance those things, you're going to create an environment where human beings can thrive.
Yeah. Authenticity is a bit of a tongue twister even for
apparently
me.
Today.
This time I came on the right side there. Mimi, when we look at the overall scenario as a speaker, because you're also a keynote speaker, and a lot of business leaders out there who get invited to come and speak to various audiences, and they have the question, what am I going to say? How do you tailor your message to match the audience? Because I saw you as a keynote speaker in one of the marketing mini marketing summits, and so Mimi was at a mini marketing summit, and then I was very happy to get in touch with the organizers to and invite you for our discussion, and I'm glad I did.
Thank you.
Now, how do you tailor your message to different audiences? Because I believe you sometimes go and speak to a marketing summit. Sometimes you will speak to a leadership summit or maybe a strategy summit. How do you tailor your message across audiences and especially across times? Because these are tough times to be a Sri Lankan. These are tough times to be a Sri Lankan corporate professional.
Absolutely.
Tough times for you, for me, and for anybody who is watching this show. But especially for a leader, when they address audiences, how do you suggest that they tailor their message?
I think tailoring is probably the key word. I never repeat a keynote. Some of them might be similar because, of course, the insights are, the
Correct.
insights don't change overnight. But I tailor every presentation or every keynote I do to that audience. I spend significant time, if I'm speaking to a healthcare audience, to understand their world and what they're going through, because the inconsistencies and the tension are unilateral. But how they come to life are very different. So I recently did a conference, for example, to an organization of dietitians, about 1,000 of them on a call in the US. Now they're experiencing all the same things, but in a very niche segment. And I went to lengths to make sure that when I did that keynote, I used words that they understand, terminology that's relevant. So when they get to the end of that keynote, they think, and they're right to a certain extent, that I understand their reality. They're like, that woman that spoke to us knows what it's like to be a dietitian right now. As an empathetic leader and someone who wrote a book about empathy, I consider that's my requirement. That's a mandate for me. I can't talk about empathy and then not empathize with my audience. So I think that tailoring and preparation is really important. Beyond that, some of the things we've spoken about today, being authentic and being positive. I like to believe that when I leave a room, I leave it more optimistic than when I went in, because I really do believe that in challenge comes great opportunity. And the glass is always half full. How you look at things is entirely up to you. If we focus on all of the things we can't do, we will hinder the things that we can do. So that's my belief.
Mimi, Singapore, Dubai, the UK, and many other Middle Eastern nations, Asia Pacific nations, Sri Lanka, South Africa, the list goes on in terms of the different business landscapes that you've been involved in. How do you manage the culture shocks, the cross-cultural differences? Because clearly all these countries would have a much different culture compared to the culture that you were born and raised in. And how do you manage the culture shock? Because today's global leaders, that's one of the other challenges they face, managing that culture shock. It's a massive challenge for them. It's not something where you can just easily read off a theory like a Hofstede theory or a model and then easily go and say, look, I can now manage any culture. It doesn't work that way. You need to be there. You need to get into the groove, as they say, and dance to the beat of each culture. What's your mantra for managing the culture shock and gaining that cultural intelligence?
I would say that we are all far more alike than we are dislike. At the end of the day, we're all humans, and absolutely across all of these markets that I've been working in, and my goal has been cultural understanding. That's why I've been on this journey. But what I learned along the way, whether you're with businessmen in Nigeria or Korea or China or the Arab world, where there are very sort of vast differences in nuances, but the key drivers of being human, it's always the same. We all want to be loved, we all want to grow, we all want to win, we all want to feel safe, we all love our children and, want to have a personal life. So if you can just represent the humanity in the room, I find that that's a really very, very powerful belief set, to believe and to understand that we're all far more alike than perhaps the media makes us out to be. Of course, a really healthy respect for how other people do things is incredibly important. That's part of being empathetic. The other thing I've learned is that if you don't know, ask. Again, back to curiosity. Many people are scared to ask someone from a different culture, sorry sir, could you help me understand why you've done this, or why we're eating this, or why we're working like this? I have found that in nearly 100% of the time, that authentic curiosity, the people respond brilliantly and they say, Mimi, let me tell you. They want to tell you, right? It's like the elephant in the room.
Correct.
So be open, be authentic, listen, and be curious.
Some exciting thoughts there indeed, Mimi. And like I said, you're a global corporate citizen. You've worked around the world. You have so much of exposure. And we were so delighted to have you on the show as a guest and have you share your vital thoughts with us. Thank you once again for joining us today and helping the audience, the business leaders of this country, to improve their empathy game and make sure that they become more empathetic leaders. And once again, wish you and the team all the very best for all the good work you're doing.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I'm thrilled I could be here.
No matter what business or industry you may be in, a leader in, there's always room to improve your empathy. If you are empathetic, if you understand your people, and if you are there for them, they will be there for you. And especially in tough times, when there is a crisis, that's exactly what you need to keep growing your business. And always remember, no matter how different we may be looking and we may be appearing, we are much more similar than what we think. We all want to be loved, to be cared for. We all want to improve our lives. And this coming week, may it be a week where you can improve your life, improve your business, and through empathy, may it be a week that brings you all the success you desire for. I'm Tailor, and I will see you with the next episode. This is Bisnomics.